There was a time, in the era of great chaos, when the Earth and the Moon were at war with each other. A daredevil from the Moon piloted a bizarre aircraft. It was feared, and because of its shape, called Einhander.
This is my review for Einhander, released for the PlayStation 1 in 1997 in Japan and in 1998 for the United States. So, when you saw in the late 90s and early 2000s on the cover of a game the Squaresoft logo, what did you think of? You thought of Final Fantasy, you thought of all the RPGs that they put out that were, 40, 50 plus epic games that you can just lose yourself in for weeks or months at a time. So, granted, back when my Blockbuster was still selling used PlayStation 1 games, I went to their used game section and I noticed there was a disc there. It didn't have the cover, it didn't have the manual or anything like that, but there was a disc there that had the Squaresoft logo on it, and that was Einhander. So I'm like, oh wow, this must be some RPG that I haven't played or heard of before. So I picked it up, brought it home, and to my surprise, I put it in, and what did I get? I got a 2D side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, but this wasn't any ordinary side-scrolling shoot-'em-up. This was a shoot-'em-up developed by Squaresoft that used an excellent 3D engine, a really crazy techno soundtrack, and a beautiful presentation with some really hard gameplay, and I was just blown away. I'm like, whoa, where did this game come from? Now, the reason why I was so blown away by Einhander at the time was because prior to owning a PlayStation 1, the last time I had played a side-scrolling shooter was on the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo, so this was my first time experiencing a shooter like this on a console that could output 3D graphics, and this was my first shooter for the PlayStation 1. So granted, when I put this thing in at the time, I was just blown away by what I was seeing on screen. Now, what makes it so special is that it's presented in a 2.5D style, and what I mean by this is the graphics are 3D polygonal, but it's side-scrolling in the sense that you're on a predetermined path, so you can only go up and down, front and back, but the camera will shift its view to give you different angles of the action, and it really presents a crazy dynamic that just looks excellent, and it ties in really nicely to the environments in the game. And I'm showing you the first level here because I didn't want to break up and show you different gameplay levels and such and break up the gameplay, because I think by looking at level 1 here you can see how these levels are crafted and how it takes advantage of shifting the camera angle and just seeing everything all together here and how one level in this game looks. So the way the gameplay works in Einhander is that when starting a new game, you'll have the choice between 3 different ships. Depending upon which one you choose, you'll have a different loadout of power-up combinations that you can use. For example, the ship that I like to use, I'm able to use 3 different power-ups and have a regular machine gun, but you do have the option to choose a ship that, say, has a more powerful double machine gun, but you can only use 1 power-up at a time. So there's definitely strategy involved in picking which ship works best for you. And once you're into the game, I personally like to use the ship with the 3 power-ups. So, as an example, I can shift between 3 different power-ups, which are picked up from the enemies by using the L1 and R1 buttons. And the next dynamic that's thrown into that is that by pressing the circle button, you can also change the fire direction that these bullets will come from. So some weapons will fire up and down depending upon which way you have your gun arm positioned, and some will fire up at an angle, down at an angle, or directly in front of you. So there's a lot of strategy involved in choosing which way you want to direct your gun when you're facing the enemies. And it also should be noted that this is a very challenging game, at least until you get, the hang of the enemy patterns, as you will die in one shot from mostly all the enemy bullets. The levels themselves will often have a mid-boss as well as an end boss, and the end bosses are some of the biggest highlights in the game. They're usually gigantic, presented with some kick-ass techno soundtrack, and it's just a lot of fun. It gets your blood pumping, and they're just a treat to look at. Other than that, gameplay is pretty basic. It's score-based, so at the bottom right corner of the screen, depending upon how fast you kill your enemies and you kind of keep your chain going, the multiplier will build up and up as long as you're killing enemies, and your score will increase. You can also adjust the speed of your ship by pressing L2 or R2, and there are a handful of different speed options, so it's not just either fast or slow. You have a lot of different options depending upon how many times you hit the button. So other than that, guys, definitely if you want to check out an atmospheric, moody, well-designed game with a great soundtrack that just accompanies everything so well, graphics that are they're just so impressive, even by today's standards. I popped this game in and I'm still super impressed by it. And if you're a fan of shoot 'em ups, you definitely have to check this game out if you haven't already. So there you go. Hope you like the game if you pick it up.